Andrew, it's so nice to see you again in Shanghai. I remember last time I saw you it's pretty much 1 year. So can you tell us like why you come to Shanghai this time?
But this time it's exactly like last year.
Yeah, exactly like last year.
Same reason.
Yes.
The reason is that I published a new book.
Yes, the
this time
Chinese
it's
one.
only prose. I mean, no photographs, no pictures,
Yes.
but some drawings made by a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And it's just about some short prose in the form of a dictionary. So you have many entries for every entry is some story that of my 40 years in China, or even some of them are even about my childhood in Italy.
Last year when I met you, it's because you're another photo book, which is that, what is the name again?
At Ease,
At
China,
Ease.
1981 to 1984.
Yeah,
That
okay.
was the time for my first trip to China. That was actually in Nanjing University for a couple of months.
Right.
And then the next year in Shanghai, Fudan for 2 years.
Well, I read on the internet about you. So, like they said in the beginning, you worked for Italian Fur as the chief representative.
And it was impossible in the 80s to live in China as a photographer.
Right. Okay.
Right?
That's true. That's true. That's true.
So, but fortunately, in those years, there were big requests for Western people who speak Chinese, because all these business people were coming to China because the market was finally opening, and
Right.
China needed everything, technology, equipment, and so everybody was looking for people who could speak Chinese, like Italian companies using Italian people. So I was one of the first batch of these people working for an Italian company,
I see.
trying to sell things to China. It was in a way solving my
Yeah.
life problems on one side,
Mm.
and on the other it gave me the possibility to see many faces of China that I wouldn't see
Right.
as a common person.
That provide you a good opportunity to also go
So-
around China and also
Yeah,
really
yeah.
get like the beneath. Like
Yeah.
because people come here when people travel to China and make the tourists.
Yeah, just
They come,
see,
you see
surface.
something visual, but you don't go under than that.
Yeah,
I think the most important part about I think get to know the Chinese culture is get to know the people.
Yeah, that was also helping me on my literature interests, because
Right.
that's literature. I mean, when you work, and if you have a negotiation, and there were big contracts with like tens of millions of dollars, and so I mean, you really have to talk seriously with people. I mean, it's not just the surface. You have to
It's true. It's true. It's true.
how to
It's true.
convince them, how to let them feel that you're reliable and your equipment is good, and then sometimes I took these delegations to Italy to visit, and you have to find the right way to talk about Italy. And
So I think let's talk a little about the book. I think earlier, also in the book talk, we discussed a little about the translation. When you read the part which is being translated from Italians to Chinese, do you feel it's another you, that part?
no, in this case, I would say it's quite special, because this person is a person that is my close friend since 45 years.
Right.
So she knows me very, very well. But the language is certainly different, I mean, because everyone has his own way of writing. And so her way of writing is not mine. So it is precise, but not in my style. So that's not my voice, it's somebody else's voice saying my things in a very
Right.
precise way.
Right. According to this like 40 years experience that you working here and live here, do you find like people believe as long as there is a language translation, the people have to and people will be able to understand each other? Do you agree with that?
Translation is a very tricky thing. So of course now it's easier than before. I mean it's quicker than before, because you can use Google or Baidu or whatever to translate something very quickly. But the translation could be misleading when it comes to languages that are so far away, like Chinese and Italian or Chinese and English. And so some way of expressing things could be misleading even.
Yeah.
And
Do you have a story which is where the translation calls the
well, I should think about it, because there's millions. There's so many that it's difficult to focus on one particularly. But I think about like when I was even negotiating in the early
Yeah.
90s, What I think now about what I was saying at the time, I feel ashamed now. I mean, I turn red now. I was saying things that were really hurting to the Chinese people without realizing it.
Oh, yeah.
You have something that in Italian is very normal to say to someone. If you translate it badly in Chinese, it becomes an offense. The Chinese are very polite, so they don't react.
Yeah.
But you've said the wrong thing in the wrong moment,
Yeah.
to the wrong person, and you don't know.
Yeah.
And that is very, very tricky. And so I think that automatic translation in a way is dangerous. One is the preciseness of the translation, technically I would say. And it also in that case could be some problem. The emotional level that could be not transmitted in the proper way or not strong enough as you would like. And then the cultural level, when you could say things that are not offensive in your language but they are in the other one.
Right.
And so it becomes quite tricky because the people will not think, because he doesn't know the language. No, he speaks very well, so he should know.
Exactly.
So he's saying the wrong thing in the wrong moment. And so it could be, of course, if you're just chatting, it's no problem. But if you're negotiating a contract, maybe it's a problem.
Yeah, it's true.
Or even if you want to have a good relationship with a girl. Oh, yeah, it's quite embarrassing.
Right. Yeah.
So that's about it. It takes so long. I mean, there's no machine that.
I think that sometimes, from my experience, just like at least for people who speak, let's say, more than one language, it just comes to the turn that you accept. There are so many messages, especially on the emotional perspective or some unique like culture perspective, it's untranslatable. And at least if you wanted the other side to comprehend, to understand, you have to use other media. It's not. I'm not even saying use words. For example, using music, using arts, because that is not something you don't need language translation. But I think it's very important for our audience to know that sometimes do not assume that when you speak a fluent of certain language that this message will cross.
That's very dangerous when you speak it fluently. Because then when people think that what you're saying is just what you mean.
Yes.
Because if you speak very badly, okay, maybe it doesn't work. But in that case, I think that was the period that I'm most ashamed of. When I was speaking very fluently but saying terrible things.
I think it's...
No, I mean, just an example. I mean, sometimes it makes a difference even if where you are in China. Like in Italy also. I mean, the same thing said in Naples or in Torino is different.
Yes.
In China, even more, from Guangdong to Hubei or something.
Right.
So I say to someone, it's quite strong. I mean, especially in the north. I mean, I didn't mean something so strong. I mean, I was meaning that you don't care about this, but people feel offended. Just an example, but there are millions.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit. Also, one thing I read earlier about one of the vocabulary you put here is called Chinese for 国籍 nationality. I think because I talk a lot about cross culture thing in this show, I noticed, especially living here in Shanghai, I noticed a lot of people like to categorize people based on their nationality. What the Chinese people do, what Chinese people should behave, or what Italian, American, and the French. So I remember you put it there. Is that one of your friend who's a musician told you in ancient time, people don't actually categorize or decide to connect or not connect based on nationality, but based on their common hobby, interests. So to your experience, actually, how do people like to categorize each other based on nationality today?
It's the simplest way. I mean, you just put a label on people and that's it. I mean, but it happens even in between Western countries, for example.
Yeah.
So maybe a German can say something is done very bad. Italians, you see. It's very common. I mean, they call us spaghetti or whatever. It happens. Especially, mostly is when the more advanced or a richer country toward the poorer one. Often they use this in derogatory terms, and sometimes even like very far countries like China, when the culture is very different. So to simplify, they tend to put labels on people. So maybe for the Chinese, they didn't have very clear labels for Italians, but just for foreigners in general. And what I said is the easiest thing is to put a label. I mean, you don't need to go further, deeper into understanding. So you just say, okay, just dismiss it in a way. I mean, this thing happening, this guy is behaving like that because he's a foreigner. So you just dismiss every further reasoning about why he's doing that, or maybe even if that thing was good in a way, or no, it's not bad because he's a foreigner and finished. So that's the easiest way. Of course, there are ways. Like I have another enter in the dictionary talking about these world citizens, including some Chinese. I mean, there are people, no matter where, that they are not so limited by their own background, their own culture, but they are so open that they can easily accept anything coming as far as they are interested in it, coming from anywhere in the world. So I was citing the musician, he's like a composer, because he said me during his interview, we were talking about how, for example, a Chinese musician can go to the West and write music using Chinese orchestra, Western orchestra, Western instruments, so they don't belong to the Chinese music tradition. But eventually, this music will have Chinese characteristics because it's written by Chinese. And the same is between people. No? If you have a common interest, you think that something is very good. No matter where it comes from, you can accept it and use it as your own. So that is the right way, I think, to make culture. Otherwise, I mean, if you don't want to go through this painful thing of trying to understand somebody else, and you just put a label and better or good. I mean, and that's the story.
And one thing I wanted, because you said about this, another term which is I like it so much when you mentioned about it's a history. You said very early on that when you try to apply for scholarship, the teacher who are processing this said that you're a rich family, why you need to apply for the scholarship. Then it turned out they made a mistake. It's not that you have a 4 different apartments, but you have a 4-person living in one apartment. And then the conclusion, I like the conclusion so much, is because you said we actually have a difficulty to understand small things, even in a family affair, like internal affair. But then people are passionate to talk about the world, to talk about the history. To very ancient time, we were not even there. What you said remind me of what's really happened today, like in the modern time. We see people debate on the social media and about the politics, society, the economy. Actually, there's a very famous Chinese writer. He's an anthropologist. I think a couple years back, he brought up a concept. It's called the disappearance of your neighborhood, which refers to that people talk about big things, abstract things, but right? Yes. So he said, but you don't actually know what's really going on in your neighbors, in your just compound. So why do you think this happened? People are so fascinated by an abstract idea, but people seem like indifferent or don't care about what's really going on actually in your community. Why?
Well, now people are mainly informed by media. They don't know their neighbors who they are. They don't even talk to them. I mean, when they live in these big compounds, you don't know who's living there. I mean, you hardly talk to them. Maybe good morning. All your information already put into your brain comes from the media. And the media, of course, talk about everything, and they give you just their version of what's happening.
That's right.
But you take it for good, you take it for granted. I mean, that's it.
Right.
And everyone has different sources. Maybe you are a more leftist person or more rightist person. You get different sources, and both of them are so sure that what they know is the real thing.
Is everything, yes.
There's no discussion.
Right.
They think, no, it's not like that. And then you remind them that even history, everything is not so precise. I mean, even my family things sometimes comes out so unprecise. I mean, and so can you imagine the big thing? So always be humble in a way when you face things that are so far from you. Humble to the point of thinking that maybe that's not the real thing. Maybe there are other things that I don't know that would change my opinion on that thing. So not be so, strongly.
I see like sometimes a little bit like it's funny to see people like in debates, like they really I think internalize everything that other person saying, and I think it has happened in China as well as everywhere around the world. Especially when you look at the social media, you have sometimes I was joking like we thought that we know everything. We talk about the history, right? You talk about history some years ago, but I even say that sometimes if I ask you like, so 1 week ago, what you were doing at exactly the same time, I don't know, right? So I think it's sometimes like there's a lot of things we actually don't really know.
Mentioning listening tonight to our memory is so imprecise. I mean, so vague.
Right.
But the thing is that it fixes on a certain idea, and then it becomes the real one.
The truth.
But it's not necessarily the real one.
Do you think it's because of the reason people want a certainty? Because people need to have a certain control of their life. They need to feel that way. If you try to tell people that actually you don't control everything, as a matter of fact, you don't control most of the thing. But then people feel like they're helpless. In this way, how people would able to, in every day, on daily basis, like operating their life, go on with their life.
I've been also always not so much interested in these big things, but I prefer to focus on my interests, on things that I'm doing or my friends are doing. Maybe we exchange. I've read a very good book, and I've heard this music is wonderful.
Yeah, it's very specific.
Yeah, I mean, it's more related to me.
I think one thing I like so much about the books is you put everything into context. Even though you put every Chinese different vocabularies, but you try to contextualize in your own term, so that I think on the one side people will see the unique, Andrew's perspective, your context, what you interpret, how you learn this word, and what are your experience about this word. But also, as we have discussed so far, I find another thing is we can, if you go deep enough, you find it sound like some of the topic, like a very philosophical reflection, actually I think could be shared by many Chinese. So thank you so much for joining this interview, and I hope that we will have a future chance to continue our very interesting conversation.
Really?
So thank you very much.